Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Severance Season 2, Episode 10, Cold Harbor, a magnificent and heartbreaking season finale that perfectly ties together this second season with violent delights, some big answers, and still plenty of mystery for a third season. And a massive thank you to all of you for joining New Rockstars this season. Covering Severance Season 2, I think it's been my most rewarding experience analyzing a season of a series, and it's not just because Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller created such a great show, it's because all of you trusted our channels to make it part of your weekly viewing experience. So praise Kier and praise you. And if you want to keep this Severance waffle party going, grab one of our new Severance themed shirts, one of our mugs, one of our hoodies at our merch store, nerdriot.shop. Also, available now on Audible is the latest in the Hunger Games series, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Yellowstone's Jefferson White narrates, and I can't wait to hear him bring Hamish Abernathy's origin story to life. Okay, the Cold Harbor episode of Severance opens with no cold open, just right into the opening credits. And now that all of season 2 has been unveiled, I think it's worth re-examining this opening credit imagery just to see what new connections we can pull from it. Like what we noted about how Mark seems to be torn between Gemma and Helly in this imagery seems to be even more important now after the fateful decision by Innie Mark that ends this season finale. And the fact that it seems to be Helly's eye that peels its way out of the back of his head tells us what his choice was eventually going to be. Also, the frequent shots of Innie Mark and Outie Mark working together to carry and to pull each other through the different barriers of these transitions very much play into the ways that Innie Mark and Outie Mark had to negotiate with each other and to trust each other to get through the barriers of Lumen. The giant Harmony Cobell holding everyone inside of her notebook, we noted before, sets up the Severance medical procedure being her invention that she conceived in her school notebook. And the importance of goats in this imagery sets up what we finally learn in this finale episode, how goats like Emile are bred by mammalians nurturable as sacrificial animals to be slaughtered along with the victims like Gemma Scout to, quote, guide their spirits to Kier's door. And I'll theorize what I think that actually means a bit later. And the frequent images of Mark being surrounded by bebes and finally by a bebe Kier Eagan definitely foreshadows Mark and Gemma's struggle to conceive and how that trauma was exploited by Lumen for the Cold Harbor file. This show is for now keeping its biggest truths about Lumen's big plan concealed, at least what Jame Eagan wants out of this process, but for now we feel pretty good about it being to open that Kier's door, meaning some kind of eternal life involving perhaps resurrecting the identity of Kier Eagan as a fresh new Innie within the brain and the body of one of his descendants. Actually, speaking of Cold Harbor, Redditor Roses and Vodka noticed that the baby crib from the flashback in Shakai Bardo, season 2 episode 7, the one that Mark drunkenly dismantles and Gemma's Innie is now forced to dismantle in the Cold Harbor room, on that box the brand name was Cole d'Arbor. It was there the whole time, folks. Also, you'll note that this crib was a 3-in-1, a piece of furniture that converts from a bassinet to a crib to a toddler's bed. I have one of these for my son. I love them. And that was a callback to this exchange all the way back in the very first episode of the series.
I still don't quite get the 3 beds.
Rickon's colleague told us that switching out the beds as the child grows can wound that child.
Irreparably.
So now we open episode 10 back in the birthing cabin with Harmony, Devin, and Innie Mark, and we now see from this angle that the hearth is indeed flanked by 2 statues that we see in the closer angle later, appearing to be Kier Eagan and his wife Imogen Eagan, and both of them are pregnant with baby bumps, which makes me even more grossed out at Kier Eagan, because my wife and I decided early on that we were not going to be the kind of couple who says we were pregnant. She was. And during this process, while the dad's body doesn't change during those 9 months other than us just gaining stress weight, some magical hormones do kick in after birth when we hold that baby and our brain chemistry gets rewired from sleep deprivation. So to me, this suggests that it's the Kier tradition to believe he did just as much pre-birth work as the missus did, and he probably didn't do shit after any of the kids were born. Harmony explains that if Innie Mark isn't done with the Cold Harbor file, they can still save Miss Casey / Gemma, and describes a long black hidden hallway.
From Irving's drawings.
What?
Cobell's response is interesting because in season 1, Cobell was interested to see whether Innies could remember anything from their Outie life. So the fact that Innie Irving and Outie Irving shared these dream visions of the experts hall enough to be able to draw it on the severed floor tells Harmony, who is the OG creator of the severance procedure, something new that she didn't know. That's something about the natural brain chemistry, perhaps creative unconscious thought, can cause severed halves of a brain to start to drift back together via the dream process, which could be a key solution to the endgame of the show. And then back to Helly and Jame Eagan in MDR. Jame creepily told Helly that she tricked him before, and he references the funny speech she gave at the party and how he was cross with her after. Remember when he called her a fetid moppet? And then he says,
Through a tin of candies.
He will later say that these types of outbursts of raw rage are what make him and Helly the most like Kier, recalling Helly throwing the speaker at Mark's head. Helly grabs a blue marker, blue being one of her signature colors, as a potential weapon, but James says he doesn't love his daughter Helena, that he used to see Kier in her, but that Kier left as she grew. For Helena, this explains why she went along with reinserting herself at the start of the season, because to pursue Mark Scout, romantically as she did, that was like an act of impulse that I'm sure her father would attribute to Kier. That spark she felt when she saw him on the recordings was really the essence of Kier's frolic, we could say, that was rekindled. James says,
I had others in the shadows. But he wasn't in them either.
So the family is bigger. We're reminded of Harmony last episode telling the gate guard that Devon was, quote, one of James, and we inferred from that Jame has probably impregnated other women over the years. Helena has potentially countless half-siblings we have yet to meet, or maybe we already have met some of them, because people over the years have noticed a Devon Feigl on Irving's list of severed employees, and now at the end of season 2, Devon doesn't seem to have any ulterior motive that I can see, and Mark and Devon did recall having some other alcoholic father. This line from James suggests that there are other living Jame Eagan descendants besides Helena. It's also odd that he says he sired them in the shadows, as if he knows those other progeny were out of wedlock and therefore wrong. But the term shadow might apply to the shadow forms of Mark and Helly, Dylan, and Irving that we saw in the Ortbo and were now depicted in the newest mural art by the Elevator. Helly lunges toward Jame.
You and your family created hell, and you're going to burn in it.
God damn, what a thing to say to a CEO's face. Like, imagine being able to say this to the evil Sackler assholes who created the opioid crisis. While Helly is, of course, referring to the severed floor being the hell that she's currently trapped in, her wording also implies that the Eagan family are kind of the gods who created the whole world as everyone knows it, and that God in Christian theology created hell in a way, and that Helly thinks that there's just something kind of messed up about having to create any hell at all to banish souls to. Now, we don't know if Helly is stopped by some invisible force, like some programming in the Severance chip that prevents physical harm to the founder, CEO, Jame Eagan, or just Helly is restraining herself, but it does create this incredible frame of her and Jame being perfectly silhouetted, recalling Quentin Tarantino's shots of The Bride and Kill Bill. I just think in season 3, we are now going to see the series shift from Mark's story to Helly's story. We transition on Helly's head turn to Mark's head turn, setting up how both of these Innies will turn in sync to follow their own path. Harmony and Devon walk Mark through the plan. Innie Mark will complete the Cold Harbor file, which will then lead to Gemma going through a test, while Innie Mark has to get to the exports hall. Then Outie Mark will take over to find Gemma down there, get her back to the elevator, where Innie Mark will take back over and get her to the exit stairs. And Devon says,
If we can prove that they kidnapped her, it will end them.
okay, so I think we can assume from this line, if Harmony Cobell was on the inside of this process from the beginning, that Gemma Scout never actually died, but rather her death was completely faked by Lumen, and that she was kidnapped by the company, severed against her will, and held as a prisoner. But we still don't know when Lumen first targeted Gemma, considering in the Ja'Kai Bardo episode, we saw that it was Lumen blood machines at the college blood drive, and it was a Lumen-owned fertility clinic. So what really happened on the night of the car crash remains a mystery. Like, there could be a season 3 episode that shows that she went with the company willingly as part of some experimental fertility treatment that she did without telling Mark. And then Gemma just didn't read the fine print of what she was agreeing to. So Innie Mark rightfully asks, if Lumen as a company ends, won't his life as an Innie end? Likely expecting this, they hand Mark a camera recording on a similar camera that Milchick used for Helena and Helly to communicate in season 1. Based on it being daylight and Outie Mark's first recording, they would have recorded this at their snowy rendezvous point before they drove to the retreat after sundown. And the conversation starts off well. Innie Mark seems happy to see his Outie, but Outie Mark overplays it by excessively apologizing and describing Innie Mark's life as a, quote, nightmare, not realizing that Innie Mark actually likes his life. That's really what makes Innie Mark feel like the people trying to persuade him don't really know him and are therefore underestimating what they're asking him to give up. We transition to Outie Mark on the cabin's upstairs deck with the moonlight gleaming over the lake. With the vibrant blue light of the scene, I just appreciate the day for night filming here, where we are actually able to see everything outside clearly, just because Ben Stiller smartly chose to abide by the convention of blue equals nighttime. And he avoids the frustrating, muddy obscurity we often see on nighttime scenes in shows like The House of the Dragon. Like, I don't care how good your TV settings are, way too many TV directors these days are getting paid to make shows that are impossible to watch at home during the daytime if you have a single window in your home. The blue coloring also gives a perfect color contrast: blue for Outie Mark, fiery orange from the fireplace for Innie Mark. And as always, they use different focal lengths for Innie Mark versus Outie Mark, including, I think, even on the viewfinder of that cam, which results in Outie Mark's face looking a bit wider and a bit flatter. And since he's outside in this cold breeze, it often results in his hair just kind of doing the emo Peter Parker thing over his forehead to make him just look a little less trustworthy. Either way, Outie Mark just comes off as having a bit more of a smug, bit less trustworthy vibe, kind of like Adam Scott in Step Brothers, especially when he starts trying to pitch Innie Mark on reintegration and opening up the Innie to a shared consciousness on the outside world. Outie Mark starts to feel frustrated at having to put on that falseness in this sales pitch.
This life, our life, belongs to both of us, and I want to share it with you.
And notice that he drops his smile right after hitting the stop record button. And having owned one of these handycams when I was a kid, sometimes it continues to record for a second or two after you hit stop. So that dropped smile might have been captured at the end of the take for the Innie to see when he started watching it back. I just love how this dialogue unfolds between the two, because Outie Mark's reintegration pitch to us, the viewers, at first seems like the logical perfect answer. But as Innie Mark begins to pry at that logic, we too, in real time, realize that we don't really know how reintegration works, and this isn't that great of a deal for the Innie. And at this point, an amazing superimposition frames Innie Mark on the right inside and Outie Mark on the left outside, facing each other as if they are in the same room. Ben Stiller's actually using the same type of left versus right dialogue intercutting that Peter Jackson used with Gollum versus Smeagol's dialogue in Two Towers, starting by showing us the initial slow turning transitions among the two identities, and then just escalating to an intercutting as if they were two different people talking to each other. Innie Mark points out that Outie Mark has been alive 20 times longer, so there's far more history and trauma provided by the Outie than work experiences from the Innie. And as their back and forth escalates, we are reminded again of what Petey said in season 1. You carry the hurt with you, you feel it down there too, you just don't know what it is. So think about that. Every time Mark has walked back and forth, inside to outside, both sides have probably felt increasingly agitated and distrustful, carrying over and compounding those feelings, which results in further entrenching each other in their corners. Outie Mark confesses that he lost his teaching job because he started showing up to work drunk, and that he hid Gemma's belongings in the basement to try to pretend she didn't exist, and he just wanted a version of himself severed from all that pain. And for a second, that argument seems to actually stir enough empathy in Innie Mark, but then Outie Mark messes up again by mistaking Helena's Innie name as Helly and glibly compares that romance to his much longer life with Gemma, and that just circles back to being insulting to Innie Mark. Of course it does. So Innie Mark now takes control of the situation, putting Outie Mark on the defensive, and we end with this great edit of showing the camera's video recording as it would actually look as two separate takes, one after the other.
Can't you just trust me? No.
So now Harmony steps in to talk to Innie Mark, and after this kind of Mark on Mark meta dialogue commenting on any frustration viewers might feel at a lack of answers, we now get Harmony looking directly at the camera, addressing us, the viewers, to finally give some confirmations.
The numbers are your way.
So Harmony says the numbers are a doorway to Gemma's mind, and that the feelings he feels when he looks at those numbers correspond to the four tempers. Woe, depicted as the bride, we see that dancer from Dylan's Waffle Party in season 1, and remember that ghastly form of Woe in the Ortbo episode also wore a bridal veil. Frolic, the jester, Malice, the ram, and Dread, the crone. We learn that each cluster of numbers is one of Gemma's tempers, what Harmony calls the building blocks of Gemma's mind. And with every file that Mark has completed, a new consciousness of Gemma has been formed within a new Innie. 24 files so far, Cold Harbor is the 25th and final. I always love a season finale sit-down explanation, like we saw this in both seasons of Loki, but what is not asked or answered in this conversation is, why is Lumen doing this? What does the company hope to gain from Mark and Gemma going through this process? And that's before any of the other questions we still have after this episode, like how did Gemma get down there? Were the other MDR Innies also batching numbers for Gemma or for other people down on the testing floor whom we haven't met yet? Also, is measuring the human consciousness in metric categories of the four tempers a legitimate science, or just kind of a culty pseudoscience that Lumen's instruments are programmed around? And to be honest, I I love that these questions were not answered yet, because these are really the broader series questions beyond the scope of the season. And this finale really just confirms enough to motivate Mark's rescue mission of Gemma, which in my opinion is the only dilemma this season really promised to resolve. Instead, in this moment, Innie Mark just asks Cobell, why is she telling him this information? Why is she here? And rather than admit her part in the history of the Severance procedure's invention, Harmony just reverts to scolding Innie Mark as a child, saying there's no honeymoon ending for him and Helly are, and that Lumen is just using him.
I don't believe you!
And they'll discard you like a skin husk!
Discard you like a skin husk? Interesting choice of words there. It might be a hint to one of those unanswered questions, like Lumen might actually be using the bodies and the created Innie consciousnesses as vessels to harvest some meaty fruit within that Jame Eagan could Innie Mark threatens them now, saying that the next thing he sees better be the severed floor. And I love that Innie Mark thinks to walk downstairs to the ground floor door before making this threat, because think about it. If he walked back outside on the upstairs deck, they would have had to make Outie Mark scale down the outside of the cabin to prevent reawakening Innie Mark by having him come back inside. And the threat works. We transition through Innie Mark's point of view, making it look like the threshold of the cabin shares the elevator doors to the Lumen severed floor. And now, instead of the painting of Kier pardons his betrayers, there is a new painting titled The Exalted Victory of Cold Harbor. The backdrop is the icy woes hollow waterfall from the Ortbo. In the center, Innie Mark now sits at the terminal, his eyes closed and his hand raised in a euphoric spiritual pose. Surrounding Mark is, I think, every other human being Innie Mark would have seen or at least remembered during his lifetime. On the left, waded in the water, are Helly, Dylan, Devin holding baby Eleanor, Rickon, Irving, Harmony, Petey, Bert, Felicia from O&D, Elizabeth from O&D, and then the replacements we met in the season 2 premiere, including Mark W, Gwendolyn Y, and Dario R, and then Rickon's friends, Denise, Rebecca, Patton, and Balf, who were at the No Dinner Dinner Party in the first episode of the series, and whom Mark would have passed and talked to briefly during the book reading while he was on the outside during the OTC in the season 1 finale. Also, we gotta say, it's pretty crazy that the internal department at Lumen of O&D could create this painting based on party guests that Innie Mark would have seen during those few short minutes in the season 1 finale. How did they get that information? Did they get those faces from Milchick? Did they get them from Rickon? Like, Rickon kind of disappeared from the season, and he is working with Lumen. I don't trust that guy. Also, do they just have memory scans from Mark's brain? Like, he's had a lot of gaps. They could have gotten it from his brain at a lot of different points. Meanwhile, on the right side of the painting, there is Miss Casey, aka Gemma, there's Seth Milchick, there's Miss Huang, there's Natalie, Grainer, Lorne from Mamalian's Nurturable, Wyatt, who fed the baby goat in that department in season 1, and then the mysterious shadow forms of Mark, Helly, Irving, and Dylan. Their faces, when we see them closer up, are all waxed over like mannequins. Remember, they guided their path on the Ortbo through the snowy woods, and we think that was Shadow Mark behind Innie Mark in season 2 episode 1, but that was only based on the stand-in actor being the same. Another unanswered question there. We also see the 4 tempers: Frolic, Malice, and Dread, with Woe depicted as her ghostly bridal form from the Ortbo dream. And then in the back is the tall goat man from Mamalian's Nurturable. And standing at the top of the waterfall where the 4 shadow forms stood during the Ortbo is the Eagan family dynasty of Lumen CEOs, whose statues Mark saw in season 1 in the Perpetuity Wing. Outie Helena Eagan stands in the center, her face in shadow. From right to left, it's Ambrose, Myrtle, Philip aka Pip, then Jame, Helena, Kier, Leonora, Baird, and Gerhardt. And it's interesting that Helena would be at the center with current CEO Jame on her left and original company founder Kier on her right. Like, Jame Eagan is still the CEO of the company. Why is Helena Eagan at the center of this painting? By including the faces from other departments like Mamalian's Nurturable and O&D and the people Innie Mark met during the OTC, it's kind of like Lumen is saying that all of these moments were part of Mark's destined path to get to this point, and all is forgiven. Helly joins Mark and the overhead lights guide them down the halls. There's a really cool shot here where Mark and Helly start very small in frame as if they're just tiny in an endless black void until the lights illuminate closer and closer to us as they approach, and we realize we were just seeing them from a distance. They find the statue of Kier Eagan from the Perpetuity Wing positioned here in MDR. As Mark opens a note, we cut back to the statue's face that makes it look like Kier is glaring directly at Mark. Helly shifts around to see if the statue's eyes follow her. And remember, on the other side of this MDR room is a portrait of Kier. So having him here in a more tangible presence feels like this is all moving in a direction of invoking an even more physical form of him. Milchick's note instructs that Helly R will be there to bear witness from her chair, and it's signed Love, Mr. Milchick. Inside the card is a pop-up waffle suggesting the goodly splendors will include a waffle party. Hidden at first in the darkness, their tri-station appears in a gloomy turquoise glow that gives Mark and Helly for this first part of the episode an appearance like they are underwater water. Gemma opens her closet to see the coat and scarf that she was wearing on the last night she saw Mark on the outside, before she would go to maybe a car accident, maybe a kidnapping, we still don't really know. This would be the first time in 2 years that she has seen any 25th outfit in the rotation that wasn't part of the 24 previous ones, but still, she recognizes what that outfit was. We cut back to Helly asking, what happens when they extract the chip? Referring to the complete reintegration process. While Innie Mark was afraid that his life would end or be demoted in some way, Innie Helly seems excited at the prospect of having any hand on the wheel of Helena Eagan's motor functions to potentially do some real damage to the looming company. Helly, who was ready to end her life in season 1, gives Mark permission to walk away from this doomed romance.
I'm her, Mark. I'm her.
This actually could be seen as finally an answer to that very first question asked on the show. Who are you? Milchick gives Dylan his resignation request for him to read in solitude and then sprints out of the room, kind of like Ray Fiennes' sudden dash in the Grand Budapest Hotel.
She's been murdered. And you think I did it.
Innie Dylan reads Outie Dylan's response, which is very sweet. It starts off with a "fuck you," but then accepting that since they have the same body, it makes sense that they would be equally attracted to Gretchen, and that hearing his Innie was a self-assured badass. It did sting, but he hopes someday that she'll see in him the Outie what she sees in the Innie, and he just likes knowing that he's there. And he gives him the option to leave, but thinks he should stay. And notice that he does not check the approval box or the denial box. By the way, it's pretty funny to see Milchick's frantic run and his quick change when you realize it's really just getting ready for his comedy routine patter with the Kier Eagan statue. Helly tells Mark that she's been trying to think of another place besides Delaware, recalling their very first exchange in the first episode of the series. Name any US state or territory, and she responded Delaware, which now looking back probably had something to do with Helena Eagan knowing that several Fortune 500 companies incorporate in Delaware for various tax reasons. Helly names Europe, Zimbabwe, and the Equator, which they wonder if it's a building or a continent, or a building so big it became a continent. While the Equator is not the name of a country, the country of Ecuador is basically a variant of that word. Now, at first, this just seems like goofy, any small talk, but it also reminds me of the theory that the entire Ortbo could have been an artificial projection of an outdoor area that was actually contained within the Lumen building. Mark locates the final cluster of numbers.
At least it's a happy one.
Interesting that the last part of Cold Harbor would be the temper of frolic. Maybe because after Mark dismantled the crib, the two did comfort each other in front of the Christmas tree. Mark completes the file, and we get a close-up of his keyboard as he hits B for batch or bundle. This is the case on every keyboard, but G and H are right beside each other, as Gemma and Helly are Innie Mark's final choices. As the numbers go in, we flicker to a close-up of Gemma's eyes. Drummond tells Maurer to call Mr. Eagan, and the lights in MDR go out as we hear Sirius by the Alan Parsons Project, most famously used as the Chicago Bulls starting lineup entrance music. Stage fog and a spotlight fire up, showing how this MDR room apparently has always had this theatrical flourishes ready to go, building on that great jazz party in season 1. The Kier statue says, "You have brought my grand agendum closer to fulfillment, making you one of the most important people in history." So agendum is not a word, but it is fitting that the term for Kier Eagan's master plan is itself buried in this kind of verbal nonsense. Milchick and the Kier statue go into the scripted comedy routine set to what sounds like pre-recorded laugh track sounds. Kier riffs that he too would say Milchick was handsome if not for his core principle, not probity, meaning honesty, but rather vision. Kier cuts off Milchick, calling him verbose and saying it's a good thing he didn't write the first appendix because it would have burst. And Milchick seems to be pissed at this, which is odd because I assumed he scripted these jokes, but apparently he is reading off of a script provided by Lumen, which I'm just wondering, did O&D write a bunch of setups and punchlines? But then Milchick seems to go off script, saying Kier's legacy is larger than life, not his company, but...
I mean this wax statue that's 5 inches taller than you actually were.
And while this could have been a corny joke if just delivered normally, the fact that Milchick says it with such spite makes it feel like an insult. And the creepy shaking the Kier statue does here, it's just so disturbing. We don't know if he's being operated remotely by someone else or if these are all programmed voice-activated responses, and like maybe when the frolic of this moment shifts to malice, that's what triggers the end of the routine. Milchick brings in Choreography and Merriment with a marching band in blue uniforms stamped with Lumen enters. Their instrument instruments are all white, likely 3D printed by O&D. We saw like a green brass instrument among the Allentown Christmas gifts back in season 2, episode 7. Milchick returns after another quick change with a blazer patch for C&M showing a harp. C&M would be yet another department of presumably severed employees on this floor, and I feel like the dancers at Dylan's waffle party would have also been from this department. The music they play here is the Kier anthem that Cobell sang in season 1, the one that we heard a digital version of on the Ordbo video.
Kier, brilliant one, Kier.
And then they do this ridiculous thing of lifting signs to assemble 100% and Mark's forced grimace. But we are just seeing this from an impossible angle, from even above where the ceiling would be, which means that no one is actually seeing this. But then Jame Eagan enters this tiny room with a viewing screen and a portrait of Kier. The fact that the elevator opens directly to this windowless room suggests that it would be like a super important, super private room accessible only by the CEO of the company. Now the elevator only has an up arrow, just like the testing floor elevator door does. So I assume from that this would be a different lift shaft from any of the ones that we've seen before. Still, we might be seeing the bottommost floor of Lumen, like a super secret basement, the 9th circle of hell. And just a reminder about last week's The After Hours Twilight Zone reference, with the 9th floor referring to a secret floor of a department store where mannequins come to life and take turns circulating into the outside world for set amounts of time. We still don't really know if that can be connected to what Kier is doing. It's just worth noting that James' screen here just comes with a simple pad with, I think, 4 buttons. Now, maybe the 4 buttons are a reference to some of the 4 tempers. We don't really know what this room does, but it seems specific. And I don't think this is just an observation room. I think something would have been downloaded into Jame Eagan here. Meanwhile, the marching band now plays the Ballad of Ambrose and Gunnel. So Ambrose Eagan was the son of Kier Eagan and Imogen Eagan, and we first heard of Gunnel in last week's mention of the Gunnel Eagan Empathy Center in Svalbard. So Gunnel would have been Ambrose's wife. And since Ambrose's sister became CEO after him, that would suggest that Ambrose and Gunnel might have never had kids. But we don't really know between Ambrose and Myrtle who was the older kid. We're just kind of assuming the CEO dynasty of the company follows the customs of other monarchies in the real world. And that might not be the case. But if it is true, the ballad could be about a childless couple, like the way Mark and Gemma are childless. And Mark and Helly say,
See you at the Equator.
See you at the Equator.
So this reminds us of the "Meet me in Montauk" line from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the phrase Joel and Clementine would exchange as they were erasing each other from their memories. Montauk, as we've noted before, was the file Irving was working on. Since earlier they established the Equator as a building that became so big it became a continent, they're really promising to each other that they can have a whole world together and a whole life just within this single building. Helly snatches Milchick's walkie to create a diversion while Mark makes a run for it. This season started with Mark running through these halls, and I just love how we've come full circle in this finale episode. Milchick's able to push his way out of the bathroom, but Dylan traps him in with the vending machine. Dylan has always had a relationship with his vending machine ever since eating the spicy candy referenced in season 1 and the claymation video in the season 2 premiere, when Dylan is shown eating the peppermints from that machine and has a severe allergic reaction. Nurse Cecily brings Gemma to the Cold Harbor room. The words Cold Harbor are revealed with this really cool rack focus that slides across the plate. Cecily's finger has so many past puncture marks. The requirement of a small blood sacrifice seems to be part of the same system as the blood sacrifice of Emile the goat. Gemma enters the room, switches into a 25th innie, and sees what it is: the baby crib that Mark dismantled in season 2 episode 7, Chikai Bardo, with a little wrench resting on it. So it's confirmed the Cold Harbor room is based on the traumatic memory of Mark drunkenly breaking apart the Cold Harbor crib after Gemma's miscarriage, while Gemma now is dressed in the same outfit she wore when she supposedly had her car crash the last night she saw Mark on the outside. Dr. Maurer asks over the intercom,
Who are you?
Again, Mark's opening intercom words to Helly in the first episode coming back just to rub it in. They start playing Billie Holiday's "I'll Be Seeing You" over the speakers, and Maurer and Jame watch eagerly as Gemma has to take it apart. Meanwhile, Lorne carts Emile the goat to this room with Drummond. It's a hidden room directly across the hall from the exports hall door. Lorne has cleaned up from her dirty goat herder outfit into what looks like a type of funeral garb, all black, her hair in a specific braid, a pendant buttoning her vest that looks like 2 goats or rams butting heads, and then a brooch on her collar with a ring of circles. Drummond asks if this goat has verve, yes, and wiles, the most of its flock. Verve and wiles are 2 of the 9 core principles, and I guess the only ones of those core principles that matter in this instance, suggesting they want this animal sacrifice to have verve, meaning spirit, a type of vitality, and wiles, a sense of cunning. Drummond says,
This beast will be entombed with a cherished woman whose spirit it must guide to Kier's door.
entombed with a cherished woman whose spirit it must guide to Kier's door. So there are various historical cultural examples of people being buried with animals, like the ancient Egyptians with their cats, or sometimes even with their slaves to serve them or to guide them in the afterlife. But this tells us that Lumen's cult belief is to kill both a baby goat and Gemma Scout here. But we're still asking, what is Kier's door? What does that mean? Is that a metaphor for the afterlife, meaning like the pearly gates or the gates of hell? Or is Kier's door a revolving door of a kind, like the revolving that Jame Eagen mentioned in the season 1 finale, and that the deaths of this cherished woman and this spirited cunning kid are physical blood sacrifices that are really about rebirthing Kier Eagan in a new physical body. Drummond loads a captive bolt pistol. These are used to stun animals prior to slaughter, using a blank round that fires out a heavy steel rod into the brain of the animal. Drummond prays,
We commit this animal to Kier in his eternal war against pain.
Eternal war against pain. That recalls the ad that we saw in Salt's Neck for Kier's original intent of his ether as a cure-all for any malady, a kind of panacea. The word eternal here, though, implies that creating some immortal Kier Eagan could be part of that grand agendum. So Emile the goat in many of these shots just seems so sweet and calm. He climbs up toward Gwendolyn Christie in the cart and then calmly closes his eyes when the pistol's pointed. In the end credits of this episode, there are 4 animal wranglers credited, and we also see a statement that the American Humane Society monitored some of the animal action in this episode and that, of course, no animals were harmed. It's just crazy that they were able to get this goat so calm and so cute. But this sacrificial altar for Emile the goat has some markings on the side. We see one tableau of a figure weeping that could be Lorne as the goat stands on a block facing another standing figure. To the right of that, there are now 2 figures seated facing the dead goat. Another tableau shows the dead goat as like rays of light emit from its body. Lastly, we see that light emitting goat now back alive again, which must be some spiritual form, joining the standing figure on the right on the path to, I assume, Kier's door that Drummond described. Could these 4 tableaus be depicting the multiple stages of death that were referred to in episode 7, and that one of these is the Chikai Bardo? Either way, these kind of feel like ceremonial hieroglyphics, right? Lorne asks how many more she must give, telling us that this isn't the first baby goat she's had to sacrifice in a ritual like this. While Mark's completion of Cold Harbor was suggested to be historic, I just wonder if there were other times goats were sacrificed maybe for other reasons. This sacrifice is interrupted by Drummond hearing Mark thumping to get in the exports hall, and Drummond violently attacks Mark, the company clearly no longer needing him for anything now that Gemma's test is underway. As Drummond chokes him, we see his frolic tattoo on his hand becomes visible, which is creepy. Makes it feel like he gets enjoyment out of doing this to people. Lorne saves Mark, leading to a brutal fight between Drummond and Lorne. And now we see why they cast freaking Brienne of Tarth in this role. She is awesome to watch in the scene. No one else could make this such a savage one-on-one brawl. Meanwhile, in the Cold Harbor room, Gemma dismantles the crib and Mauer says the barrier is holding, she feels nothing, it's beautiful. So it seems like the test here is to create the most triggering experience possible for this person, a memory of her miscarriage, her struggling marriage thereafter, and the clothes that she wore the last time she saw her husband, just to see if any of the 4 tempers creep in during this process. The fact that Mark batched all of the temper emotions from the numbers of Cold Harbor means that this 25th Innie is completely numb to any of that possible pain. This is why Mauer would ask Gemma if she ever felt anything after leaving those rooms.
And what happened in the rooms? You remember nothing?
But when it comes to what Jame is seeking out of this, is the point of this process to create a permanent numbing pain to any kind of emotional trauma? If so, hasn't Lumen arguably already done that with the severance procedure to begin with? Or really, would this 25th Innie be a kind of ultimate Innie, one that doesn't even do what PD described of taking the pain with them across the severance barrier, even numb to that undefined lingering pain, someone who's able to just kind of walk around the world with a constant ether high? I just love how Billie Holiday's mournful voice seems to slow down time here. Her words, the chestnut tree, playing over the wood of the crib, and the wishing well, playing over James' eager eyes, wishing that this test succeeds. Innie Mark takes Drummond, pistol to the throat, to the exports hall elevator.
I'm gonna change to my Outie, and then you are gonna take him
Oh my God, the sudden shock of someone getting offed the moment an elevator door opens feels like a nod to Scorsese's insane moment in The Departed. Drummond choking on his own blood and spraying Mark is the bloodiest this show has been, but past episodes this season set up that violence, showing the extreme close-ups of Ragabi cutting open Mark's head. But Every part of the sequence is perfectly structured. Mark needs Drummond's blood to have soaked his tie so that he can get into the Cold Harbor room. And we need Drummond's body falling perfectly in the elevator doors to keep this elevator open and down here, unsummonable, so that Mark and Gemma are able to quickly get into it to escape. Mark passes the room for Minsk and immediately recognizes it as one of the files he completed. Meanwhile, Helly uses the instruments of the marching band to jab Milchick and block the space above the vending machine. It's just hilarious to me that despite Helly blocking the door, Dylan shoving the vending machine in front of it, that this CNN marching band has continued to play through it all and only really stops when Helly takes some of their instruments. Milchick orders Choreography and Merriment to return, and Helly stands up on the desk to beg them to help her. Help her with what? We will see later. Just hold Milchick back enough so that she can get to her love. Mark scares away Nurse Cecily by just screaming and waving the pistol at her face, and her response is so bold, unafraid of this weapon, just screaming, "F you, f you, f you," as she runs to snitch to Mauer. Outie Mark enters the Cold Harbor room using Drummond's blood on the tie, and Innie Gemma, having literally been born a few minutes ago, views him initially as a threat, but Mark's sincerity calms her down. It also doesn't help that Mauer freaks out over the intercom, telling her to stay away from this man. When had Mauer just stayed calm and pretended like this is all part of the test, maybe Gemma would have played along, at least long enough for Mauer to get in there. Mark doesn't have much time to react to the crib being restaged like this, but I also wonder if he was so drunk when he dismantled it before that he might not even remember doing it, which would be so tragic. Jame says, and then he doubles down. This is the first time we've heard Jame Eagan speak like a normal person, and it might be an example of some of that Kier fire finally resurfacing in him. Gemma steps out of the room to become Outie Gemma, and for the first time, these two Outies, with all their shared history, see each other alive again. And it must be crazy for Outie Gemma to have dressed up in this outfit, entered this room, and from her point of view, stepped right back out just to see her long-lost husband covered in blood. From the moment they hug, an alarm blares, and red lights fill both this testing floor and the severed floor. Gemma, having tried to escape in the recent past, springs to action. The two sprint down the halls as Mauer rages after them. Two Greek myths come to mind here. The myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, Orpheus being the musician, who's actually often depicted in art playing the same type of instrument that's part of the patch for C&M. Orpheus has to journey into the underworld to rescue his wife Eurydice, who had died shortly after they were married, but as he guides her out of the underworld, he is instructed to never look back at his wife or she will vanish, and he makes that critical mistake. Also, with Mauer chasing them, and with Mauer, played by Robbie Benson, the same actor who voices the Beast for Disney, I'm also just reminded of Theseus in the Labyrinth on Crete, fleeing the Minotaur in the maze. As the elevator doors close, Mauer screams, "You'll kill them all!" This is an intriguing line from the finale episode. What does this mean? Mauer could simply just be referring to Gemma's 25 innies, like by leaving, all 25 of those scared poor women would die. But why would Mauer yell that? Like, would Outie Gemma really care about those 25 consciousnesses that she might not even know exist? Or could Mauer be warning that if Mark and Gemma escape, the Severance program could be shut down and all innies will die? Or could it be something even darker? The Lumen Company, who seems to operate without any kind of legal scrutiny in the town of Kier, PE, could they just kill anyone who would be involved with this part of the company? And Outie Mark, knowing that he has just a few seconds in this elevator until both their innies take back over, he kisses his wife and then bing! The Zolly effect stretches the center of the frame in such a way to highlight Adam Scott's awkwardly smushed nose against her cheek, making this now a kind of uncomfortable position to suddenly wake up in. And you gotta imagine that Innie Mark would be very shocked that he is covered in Drummond's blood right now. Now, as Miss Casey, she loses her sense of urgency and sees Mark only as Mark S from MDR, but presumably the last time she was in this hall, she suspected something brought her up there when Milchick told her to turn around. While this series has mostly been steeped in neutral whites, ponderous screens, and cool blues, it's just so intense to end the season with triggering Fire Engine Red. It really underscores these floors as the hell that Helly reminded us it was. Mark gets Gemma through the exit stairwell and nearly follows her, but he stops himself. It's almost like he suddenly remembers his promise to Helly to meet you at the Equator, and seeing this Miss Casey woman on the other side of the window pleading with him doesn't stir in him the same sense of longing that he felt when he saw Helly R leave him from behind the elevator doors. Like he feels like he's with another man's wife. It's not a fuck you to Outie Mark. It's more of just a rush of wanting to make this romantic sprint with your true soulmate. So meet me at the Equator could also mean stay with me in the exact middle of things. And Helly also seems to have sensed that promise because she rounds the corner and she is barefoot. Now, I know she took off her work heels probably to better plant against the vending machine to keep Milchick trapped, but now it results in Innie Mark just kind of seeing this girl in a sweeter light. But the real heartbreak here that actually might take you a moment to realize, Gemma, out there in the stairwell, only moments ago was kissing her husband who rescued her in the elevator, and right now she has no idea that Mark has ever been severed. The Mark who just got her through this doorway, she doesn't know he's a severed Innie, so she might think that her husband is completely betraying her here. Either way, just imagine her confusion. The music here is Mel Torme's rendition of Windmills of Your Mind. It's really a perfect sign that just reflects the spinning cycles of one's mind, and specifically for Mark, how he's experiencing his own kind of revolving to return to the woman he chooses to be with. Helly sees Gemma through the window, Helly giving her a look that I wouldn't call a smug I win, but rather, I'm sorry you have to lose. Mark and Helly run in slow motion, and Innie Mark turns to look at Helly twice, and she goes from smiling to having a look of uncertainty and dread, a look that Mark now shares in the final freeze frame. The cool thing about The Windmills of Your Mind is that the original 1968 Noel Harrison version was featured in the 1968 film The Thomas Crown Affair, and featured again in the 1999 remake. That late 60s, early 70s romantic escape tone is clearly a huge inspiration on the way this season ends, much like Mike Nichols' 1967 classic The Graduate, which also ends in just one of the best movie endings of all time. A bold romantic gesture that defies all logic, literally a character frantically pounding on the glass, a lover flipping from one partner to another, a chaotic getaway with two lovers pissing everyone off, and then as they escape, those two lovers finally get a moment to slow down and breathe and realize, wait, what the hell did we just do? Did we do the right thing? Or are we just stupid kids? Actually, had Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence not already been turned into a comedic trope by Arrested Development and various internet memes, that totally would have been the track that would have started playing over this freeze frame, I guarantee you. Like lots of 70s movies would end in this kind of stylized freeze frame, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This final freeze frame, I think, just wants to capture this snapshot of these two doomed lovers who have no realistic future. That's what makes it so romantic, is that it's fleeting. And for this amazing series to properly continue, Mark has to stay in this hell for now, to flip the script and make Gemma the Orpheus figure who has to rescue him, and Mark the Eurydice who needs to be rescued, because this show really does not exist without the dynamic between Innie Mark and Innie Helly R. The closing credits are set to Bobby Darin's Work Song, which is a song about being imprisoned and forced to work in a chain gang, which obviously is appropriate for the current state of the surviving Lumen employees. Over a red screen, we see animated lines forming some familiar shapes, which is a style of opening and closing credits that was also common in 60s and 70s films. We see the ceiling lights moving down the hall on the severed floor. We see the MDR tri-station, then some horizontal lines that might be Irving's train tracks, some balloons, then the campfire surrounded by the 4 Ortbo tents, the elevator door coming up from the testing floor to the severed floor, where it then splits into two, the ceiling of the MDR room, then the artificial windows of the family visitation suite with the seagulls and the setting sun over the horizon, then the reel-to-reel tape on the tape deck in Gemma's suite, then an analog clock, which when it hits 5:15 shifts around because that's around the time Mark gets off work and then he shifts back. We see the Lumen Globe logo, and then we see the metal tableaus of the goat sacrifice, showing a goat ascending on its pedestal, radiating light, and then dying and ascending again, probably to be with Kier, and it transitions to the Lumen droplet logos that look like the blood of the goat that was spilt. Now, obviously, we have a ton of unanswered questions, as we should, to keep us looking ahead to season 3, and luckily Ben Stiller has promised it will not take 3 years this time. But let me know what remaining questions you have after the season, because I'd love to do a follow-up video unpacking what we still don't know about Lumen. Huge thanks to Noah Chen, to Brandon Barrick, and to Gina Ippolito for their research help. Comment down below with your thoughts. And again, huge thanks for joining me on this season of Severance. I had a blast breaking it down with you. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.